Welcome to the Learning by Unlearning conference, brought to you by ValueEd. We're very excited about this conference. Why? Well, we've been thinking about it for such a long time. We've been thinking about it because we begin to realize that unlearning is as important as learning. Unlearning information that is obsolete, that's not going to add any value, unlearning knowledge that is just not going to take us to where we want to go, and replacing it by learning the things that are actually going to be beneficial to us. We have an amazing 3-day conference with amazing speakers, and I'm the host for the first one, and I'm about to introduce our panelists who are going to be taking us through this discussion of learning by unlearning. But what I'd like to do is to encourage you to watch all the 3 days because you're going to hear amazing things. But let me kick off by introducing the panelists for the first session. And I'd like to start off with a dear friend of mine, and they're all very close to me, Dr. Sizagele Marutlule. Dr. Sizagele Marutlule is a doctor with a PhD. And one of the things that I'd like to actually do in the introduction is not necessarily tell you what they do, but tell you who they are. She is an executive, and that's what she does. But who is she? Dr. Marutlule is a very passionate person. She's a person who's passionate about human beings and the growth of human beings. And she likes to impart herself in supporting that process of growing human beings. She's a humanist, and she looks at things from human eyes. She's very loyal. And once you are in as part of her circle, she'll really bind you very closely with the wisdoms that she has to produce. She's introspective. Very introspective. She thinks deeply about herself and her surroundings, and she's constantly evolving and improving herself to find that higher person, that higher being that she is, in order to be able to contribute back to the societies and the communities that she works with. She's a giver and a carer and highly committed. Somebody, when she sets her mind to something, completes it. But above all this, she is kind, very kind. I'd like to introduce the second panelist, guest speaker that's going to be speaking, and that's Mr. Mtenjani. Mr. Mtenjani and I share the same star sign. We are both Aries. So jokingly, I say, whatever you hear about him, have a look at me. But let's just continue about what he does. He's an executive, but who is he? Again, a deeply reflective individual who resides with introspection so deeply that a lot of our conversations are around just how it is that things are. He's a visionary, always looking into the future, and his responsibilities and sustainability means that he is constantly going to be understanding the long term of things as opposed to the short term of things. He's a true leader. And by that, I mean he personifies the kind of things that I believe leadership should have, his characteristics and his traits. And if I had the opportunity to work for him, that's exactly the kind of leader I'd like to work for. And above all this, he is kind, very kind. The third person on our panel is Mrs. Rankin, my wife. I have the pleasure of introducing her because she is standing in for CJ Kujenga, who unfortunately couldn't make this session, and I roped her in last minute. Again, she is an executive, and that's what she does. But one of her most loving qualities is that she's generous, extremely generous. She's highly considerate of others. It's a trait that I am learning from her. She's disciplined, very disciplined, a self-starter, somebody who motivates themselves. And she considers herself a hunter in the field of her work, but also a protector and a nurturer. But above all this, she is kind, very kind. They're all patrons, people who exemplify the giving that I've referred to, and I'd like to thank them very much for being part of this and starting off the next 3 days in this conversation. From here, enjoy what we talked about, and we'll see each other soon. Take care. I'm going to start with Dr. Maritlule, and I'm going to ask you, the title of this is about learning and unlearning, and just in general, why would you think that the constructs of learning via unlearning are important in today's age? Thank you for joining.
Yeah, now we are unmuted. Thank you so much, Bikera, for having us. And it's so wonderful being in the company of these other glorious guest speakers. And of course, everyone who's dialed in to listen to us from wherever they're sitting, hopefully with some lights so they can see some of the stuff that's going on. Here's what I have come to understand. I've come to understand that your brain is much like a bucket. And if you don't make room for new stuff, there's no way that you can grow. So the concept of learning and unlearning for me is the acquisition of knowledge. When you share that knowledge with others to help them grow, you create room for you to then be informed by other people. But along the journey of learning and unlearning is also the premise of relearning some stuff. So it's a dance. You pick up new things, you share them. In the sharing, you create space for somebody else to fill your bucket. So I think it's an everyday dance.
Absolutely, absolutely. And added to that point, Mzila, would you like to give us your sense of why this is important, Mr. Mtenjani?
Thanks, Vic, and am I coming through clearly?
You are.
Okay, perfect. And thank you very much for having us and for inviting me to this session. And it comes at an opportune time to share, given what we are going through and what I'm going through in my own company. But I think in response to your question, to use another analogy and something that I've reflected on as well in the past is that the brain creates what they call neural paths in terms of learning. And with every new thing that you learn, firstly, it's a challenge to learn and it's a challenge to unlearn. But it's important that one understands how the brain functions. I'm not talking from any ounce of expertise here, so I'm actually venturing on very dangerous ground, but this is from my own experiences. And that whole process of creating neural paths is absolutely important to being able to do new things and abandoning new paths as well. And so I guess if you take that literally, if you go down the same path all the time, you're not gonna reach a different destination. But if you want to go somewhere different, you'll need to take a different path. And I think that's pretty much how the brain functions. And it's something that I've seen work very well and is beginning to work very effectively in my current employment. And hopefully I'll be able to share it with the audience later on.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're gonna talk about that. And it's almost it's funny that you just said the brain and you've gone to the brain, because I know Refilwe was having that conversation just this morning, and it is an important part of how we readjust our learnings, because we assume that part of the organ is not playing a critical role when it does. Mrs. Rankin, can I ask you your views about learning and unlearning?
Thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome everybody that is online, and also to my fellow guest speakers. And Mr. Rankin, thanks a lot for inviting us. Really appreciate it. Yeah, I think from my side, I think Zar and Zila talked about the learning and unlearning from different perspectives. I think for me, it's very important to actually continuously learn. And I don't know if people are aware of what we call continuous development, CPDs, continuous development points, that people in industries need to always acquire. And the reason why people acquire those continuous development points is because industries realize that, you know, every individual has to continue to learn because the environment moves. There's different trends, you know, there's different regulation. And if you don't keep yourself abreast of what is happening around you and how you participate in that particular environment, you actually find yourself left behind. So the, you know, whilst you have learned certain things, it's important along the way to also unlearn so that you can refresh your mind or your brain and refresh it with different things, different perspectives, different things, thinking that actually is adaptable to the current environment.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, as environments change, and particularly in regulated environments where, you know, legislation changes, and doctors and pilots have been doing it for a while, where they've had to keep up. You can't fly a 1970 Boeing when it's the year 2010 and use that kind of methodology. Otherwise, it's not gonna end well. So there's a constant need to, you know, improve yourself on a constant basis. Is very true. I got this. I read this, that speed of change is now faster than the normal human being's ability to forget is. That learning has to be quicker. And a gentleman by Starbuck in 1996 have suggested that people have difficulty in discarding, letting go of obsolete ideas, but that learning can often occur only after unlearning has occurred. Delahaye in 2005 comments that in the last few decades, unlearning has become a phenomenon worthy of consideration. So, Dr. Marukula, I'd like to come to you and ask you about, I know you talk about habits and patterns and consistent habits and fixed patterns and how people can get fixed. Tell me your view about this construct of having to, in the world of habits and certain patterns and certain routines that you get into, how this can be so involved in that. And by the way, we are now going off Facebook, if that's okay. Josh, thank you to all the Facebookers who joined us. Thank you. Join tomorrow or join very quickly if you want to follow the rest of this, but we will be going off Facebook now. Thanks, Josh. You can take us off. Over to you, Dr. Martin.
Thank you. So the idea of fixed habitual patterns, right? In the business, we often use the image of a tree to help people understand what we're talking about. So you imagine that everything that's above ground, which are your branches, and then everything that's beneath the ground, those are the roots. We seem to think of it, we call it the BB tree, right? Because the roots are your belief systems, and everything that's above ground is then your behavior. So your behavior is a consequence of your beliefs. Many people try only to change their behavior. So it's the beginning of the year, I'm going to join the gym because I want to have a six-pack for summer. It's the beginning of the year, oh, I'm in a new relationship, I'm now going to go hiking because my partner likes hiking. I've joined a new organization and their culture is to donate shoes, but I just give it because that's what I'm asked to do, but it's not what I really believe. So habitual patterns derive from our consistent behavior. But if you are looking for a different outcome, like Mzila was suggesting earlier, we have to attend to the belief system. It is futile to just prune the tree when you haven't attended to the nutrients that are being sucked up by those roots. So there's an opportunity in an ongoing practice to challenge yourself. Always link your behavior back to your belief.
Yeah.
So when you're losing your temper, when you're feeling overlooked for a promotion, ask yourself, why am I feeling hurt, overlooked, judged, shamed? Whatever the feeling is, link it back to your belief system, and you may just unlock an amazing, amazing opportunity for your happiness and contentment.
No, that's so powerful and yet so true, because you gave those examples, and the other example obviously is I want to lose weight, right? Right. and it's always great on a Sunday. Come Monday or Wednesday, it's all gone, you know, pear-shaped. And that's, to your point, you're changing a behavior without changing a belief. And you need to understand what your belief system is so that you can unlearn that belief system, replace it with a belief system that will help propel your behavior. So absolutely so true. So the other thing I read here is that one of the uncertainties in organizations today is that the pace of change, Mr. Mtenjani, will increase. One of the key challenges for those involved in facilitating lifelong learning is to understand the facilitation of lifelong unlearning or unlearning, and particularly in organizations. And you being in an organization that deals with highly sustainable, unsustainable, we can debate products, how have you begun to start infiltrating the mindset in the organization to change belief systems with regards to where you're going? Because I can imagine that there's some radical changes that you're going to have to start putting into place.
Victor, the line was getting disrupted there, so I will, but I think I got the gist of your question. You say, you speak as if change is still to come, and change is rapidly happening.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the danger is, to think that change is yet to come. And I like the way that Zah put it in terms of, you know, the analogy of the tree in terms of beliefs and behaviors, that the behavior part is the easy part. And one of the things that we've had to do, for instance, in our company at Exaro, as we have been developing a new strategy. So just by way of background, we are largely a coal mining company supplying Eskom, with some of the coal being exported. That equation tells you that in the context of climate change and negative sentiment towards coal, the livelihood of coal mining companies is limited. But there are still people who believe that there's a future for coal. And whilst I would like to believe that, one also has to be realistic about how far into the future you're going to be able to operate as a coal mining company. And do you recognize the changes that are rapidly taking place, both within South Africa and outside of the world, that require you that you change? And that for you to change, it's not going to be tweaking at the margins, what you need to do. This is demanding a radical shift in the company's operating model. It's demanding a radical shift in the country's energy system, because not only is an anti-coal sentiment, but we just speak of Eskom. You don't have to think hard about the challenges that Eskom is having for it to be able to continue to supply security of energy. So as a company, what do we do? Well, we had to start with the leadership change, and we developed an Exaro leadership way, which is about the need to change mindsets. And we've gone through a process of really digging deep and going into our belief systems in terms of, firstly, at a personal level, what are the changes that we need to make in order to be able to engage with one another as a team and really be able to tackle some of the tough questions that we need to address around the future of the company, what we need to do and what we shouldn't do, and be in agreement with that. And it's been a fascinating process, because whilst the context was from an organization perspective in terms of mindset change leading to behavior change, it actually applies to everything that I as a person have to deal with. It applies in a personal situation, a relationship. So it's not something that is neatly carved out only for the workplace. And the results are yet to come, but I'm seeing them already in terms of just how I'm engaging with other people and with my own team at work. The opportunities that I allow my team to explore without me feeling that I need to be in control. The belief system of that people are there in the first place to do good. And from that, you build trust, rather than being the kind of leader who thinks that, you know, people will always mess up, and so you always got to be there and guide them. But one of the things I've come to believe is that give people an opportunity, you'll be amazed at the kind of things that they can do.
But you see, and you know, when I said a leader, you know, personified, you know, that's what I meant. And to your point, give people a chance. People are there to do good. And those are mindset changes as well, because, you know, typically in the work environment, a waka is a waka, and all that it's meant to do is work, right? We don't delve into the spiritual context of their connectedness and how relevant that is to the outcome that they're looking for. And the other thing that you talked about is paradigm shifts. And paradigm, back in the day, we used to, you know, learn bit by bit, you know, over time, and maybe little changes here and there. But now we're having to make quantum changes and decisions which require quantum changes of thought in pattern. And one of those, Mrs. Rankin, is this experience that we've had of, you know, having to work at home in the last 16, in some cases 18 months, where we used to be supervised, where we used to work in teams, where there was some kind of routine, where there was a practice of getting up and getting stuck in traffic and going to work and getting in and swiping your card and, you know, I need to deliver this. And now it's all about self-discipline. It's about self-awareness. It's about self-commitment. It's about all those things. In your experience, tell me how that's worked for you in terms of having to relearn something very quickly overnight that we had learned something of the opposite before.
I think I'll maybe take the 2 points that Nzela mentioned, and that's the point of trust. I think actually he mentioned one, the trust, and maybe the one that Zara spoke about of that belief. So from my point of view is, you know, individuals had to quickly, you know, learn, or at least unlearn how they did their work, or went about their work. So in our space, we have to get out, go see clients, personally see clients, you know, seek business, and we had to shift that mentality from the going to see clients and doing the personal one-on-ones with the clients to doing virtual meetings, you know, virtual meetings, and also trying to find lead generation and growth opportunities. You know, so it became a bit tough because it takes a mindset shift, you know, for you to stop doing the things the way you were doing them, and encourage yourself or pick yourself up in doing things the new way, you know. So it was not actually a very difficult adjustment, in the sense that, you know, people felt, I found that in my space at least, you know, people felt the sense of responsibility in terms of their own delivery, personal delivery. You know, you don't want to basically be the person that is left behind, and then you only start getting yourself up or start running, you know, when you know that the KPIs are approaching, or when you know that there's, you know, that there is some form of recognition that is actually coming your way, you know. So it actually required a lot of self-discipline, you know, but then also just, you know, your own pride in terms of, you know, the work that you do. How do you show up, you know, when you engage with clients virtually? You know, do you have, you know, the fact, okay, I know that people are different, and I know that people, you know, hide behind the cameras, or, you know, they don't really dress appropriately. But unfortunately, if you're a person that is out there having to seek business, you've got to appear in a professional way, you know. So and it does take a sense of pride, a sense of discipline, for your clients to still see you the same way that they saw you, but in a different environment, you know. So the professionalism doesn't go away, you know. The hunger success, or the hunger to represent the business and seek opportunities does not go away, but it's just that it shows up in different ways, you know, and the different ways meaning that it shows up virtually, and I also found that you know, we had more meetings, or we had more opportunities now more than ever, you know, because all of a sudden you don't sit in traffic for 4 hours and you after seeing a client for like 1 hour, you actually find that you've got meetings after meeting, although it does affect the wellness, because that's the one thing that we obviously worry about. And that's where, you know, as a leader, you've got to, you know, implement things like engagement, communication, you know, touching base with your people to ensure that they're okay. They're in a good, you know, healthy state. You know, they have work-life balance. They don't leave a meeting and go to the next meeting. You know, so I think from my side, it's been that trust, engagement with staff, the staff taking their own self-discipline and taking pride in their work, and the delivery showing up in some form of excellence. And
I want to touch on that self-discipline. I want to touch on that element of you know, there's been a lot of self that's arisen as a consequence of where we are today. A paradigm that where we were so used to connectedness, we are now self in our own chairs. We don't have, you know, our team around us. We're self from a social point of view. And sometimes we always want to go back to the other element of it. There's an element here from Hedberg in 1981 who says that there are 2 variables of learning have been proposed, and that suggests that individuals consciously erase obsolete knowledge in favor of knowledge that is more serviceable, a process that's considered very different to forgetting, right? Where the individual unconsciously loses usefulness, or loses the use of knowledge that they don't want to use. And there are things that we have to consciously replace. And Dr. Maratlule, you know, how do we separate, you know, a learning process? How do we separate this self-reliance with the need to connect? Because we're now going to develop this tendency to be highly self-reliant. What does that mean? And do we go in that direction? Because I know you asked a question the other day as to, do you ask for help, right? And it was interesting how many of us actually don't ask for help. And we are actually in an age where asking for help is going to be so important. As Mrs. Rankin is saying, it's about wellness as well. So what's your view on that one in terms of having to learn that unreliability on yourself only?
Oh my word, that is such a loaded question, and largely because Lesego and Mzila raised 2 very important issues. Leaders are struggling with transitioning, and I've said this to you before, we lead from who we are. So if a leader doesn't have an understanding that they too are 100% human, there is no way that they can lead with compassion. We run a program in our business called Beyond the Dip, and it's a program that it's a brown bag lunch program. Over 1 hour, we sit with a leader and their exco team, and we help them think through 5 no's, how to manage crisis and change. And what we're finding and hearing often are leaders saying, how do I make certain that that productivity will not suffer? If your question is about productivity, then you are lacking the issue of trust, right? If what Lesego was saying earlier, which is self-reliance and self-direction does not equate to self-isolation. So I can rely on myself to be self-motivated, but awareness also means knowing when you need help. It is detrimental to fake it until you make it. Whoever uttered that statement, I want to find them and ask them to correct it. Because too many people fake understanding for fear of appearing not smart, slow, not with it. You would rather be the idiot in the room, because in asking for clarity, you're converting information into knowledge. So you then have the opportunity then to always say the accountability is the self part, collaboration is the connectedness part. So know when to show up for yourself fully, but also know when to raise your hand and ask for help, because the world gets, I think the world gets smaller, the problems of the world get smaller when smart, compassionate people collaborate.
And it's a complete unlearning, because we were brought up to be taught to be self-reliant, to be self-dependent, to be competitive, right? To see the next person as somebody you want to bash into the ground so that you can walk all over them to get to where you're going. And now all of a sudden we're saying, no, the world's not about that. The world's about, you know, reliance. It's about collaboration. It's about connection. It's about, you know, it's about really seeking each other. We're also taught to keep our, you know, our inner feelings or inner experiences to ourselves and not to bring them on. Now we have to unlearn that and say, but it is a useful element to it. I'm going to ask Refilwe, are there any questions in the chat? I see there are 14. I don't want to open this up because I'm going to do something, but you just let me know if there's any question. That put your hand up there if there's any question that you think is going to be relevant, because I want to go to Mzila and I want to talk, and I know you touched on it already in terms of what you're doing in your organization, but I want to talk about it now sort of broader, because you use a word and you're part of an experience around sustainability. And I think, again, we come from, and I'm Gen X. We come from consumerism, right? If it's finished, you chuck it away, you buy another one, right? You don't get caught up in this whole idea that you need to preserve something or you need to take care of it. And now we're in this construct of sustainability and having to learn about sustainability and unlearn about about amassing and acquiring. Tell me about your thoughts in that element, as well as it being relevant to corporate environments and their existence, let alone sustainability.
Thanks for that, Vic. And I mean, I think the word sustainability is on the verge, if not already, in that realm of being overused, where everything is sustainable. And I, for one, am replacing this word in my vocabulary with the word endurance, just so that I'm clear in my mind, what am I talking about when I refer to sustainability? And because I think people imply a lot of things in the word sustainability. So some people, when they speak of sustainability, they will imply endurance. So it will be there for ever, in a long time, going forward. Some people will imply that sustainability is about doing good. So the social aspect or the environmental aspect, in terms of your example, waste and waste recycling. But there's another word that's coming up before sustainability as a result of where we find ourselves today with COVID, and as well as the increasing manifestation of climate change, and that's resilience. And what resilience is really, in simple terms, about just that ability to bounce back. It's being able to take the knock, but not tipping over. Or if you do tip over, be able to stand up, dust yourself, and carry on. That leads as well to sustainability, and hence that concept of being able to endure and continue. But you got to know how to continue differently so that you can avoid the next knock, or you'll be stronger for the next knock. So resilience and sustainability are really becoming two sides of the same coin, in terms of firstly being aware of the huge impacts of these systemic changes that are taking place, that are having an impact on social, economic, and environmental aspects of our lives. And for us to be able to endure, we need to be able to respond very effectively to each one of those things. So the issue of inequality, for instance, and poverty is a big thing beyond the statement, the political statements of the as we mentioned them in South Africa, because it is an increase in risk to the wellness and livelihood of all of us in South Africa. The more people are distressed, how do you think people will respond to that in order to alleviate that state of distress? You will seek opportunities elsewhere in ways that may not be welcoming to other people. The challenge on the environment, for instance, in terms of what is now becoming a big debate on biodiversity and the impact on ecosystems. People are not aware of the potential impact on our livelihoods as a result of the destruction of biodiversity and ecosystem. Our very economy depends on that. To the extent that those systems are not resilient and we don't protect them through waste recycling, to mention one of them, we're not going to have a livelihood. So sustainability needs to be something that also we don't only look at from a perspective of the company, but we need to look at it from a personal perspective as well.
Yeah.
And at a personal level, that's where we need to start, and the personal and the individual contribution that we need to make to the whole street where we live being sustainable, to the whole community and the village, and eventually the country being sustainable. And recognize how the cumulative impact of everybody's contribution will make this a better country and a sustainable country. So the point I wanted to make, Vic, is that we then have to think of how do you actually unlearn? And you made the example of, it's not necessarily about forgetting. And then I've noted a couple of things here. I mean, it's something that you have to be conscious to. You have to make a conscious effort to stop what you don't need to continue doing, and you need to start the new things that you need to do going forward. And as a leader, in addition to that, there was a mention of awareness. Self-awareness is a critical skill and attribute of leadership, because it talks about being sensitive to your external environment, but also you're sensitive to yourself and the impact that you have on others.
And it's funny you say that, because at my old age, and I've done a lot of self-awareness thinkings, I never externalized it. So the sensitivity, and this is to your point, Mzila, the unlearning that we need to do is the self-awareness. One is not about just self, but it's about self in relation to your environment around you.
Yeah.
And the sensitivity to that. And that was a big, bit of an aha for me, because I always thought, well, I kind of, I'm very self-aware, but continue to be a bit of a jerk. But that doesn't really help matters, does it? So Refilware, you've got a couple of questions. Can we ask one question for each of them? So let's have a question, and then we'll pose it to a particular person so we can get through a couple of questions.
Okay, so we have a question from Hermina Sinello, and she's asking, I think this is perhaps even directed to Dr. Marutile, please mention one method that helps one unearth a belief they don't know they have. So you go that one, and then we'll go to Bumelelo after that. I think that one was directed, yeah.
No problem. Thank you for the question. So here's an example. An example could be you're at work. In the old days, when you used to enter an office and there were colleagues laughing when you were standing outside, as soon as you enter the room, they stop laughing. There are two ways you can interpret that, right? If you're a confident person, you think that they would have stopped to show you respect so you could speak. If you're an insecure person, you assume they were gossiping about you, which is why they have stopped talking. So here's a very basic example of just how the interpretation of events is linked to your own belief system. If you are confident and worthy, you enter every space confident and worthy. When you're promoted and somebody questions your abilities to do a job, you don't let that guide you, because you know that you have the capability to execute the task as is presented to you. So I hope that's a helpful example.
Very helpful example, very helpful. Okay, you said we've got one for, is the next one for Mrs. Rankin? And then the next one will make it for
I think this one might be for Mrs. Rankin. So when you, and let me ask everybody, when you ask a question, please do direct it or say who you're directing it to. This one say, coming back to the reference of the tree, would you say that this pandemic has almost turned our trees upside down, as we're now forced to deal with our inherent beliefs with this time of solitude and working from home? And a follow-up to that one, same from Pumelelo, is due to our home environment and work environment becoming one, how do you handle the balance between who you are and what you do?
Well, that's really good for Mrs. Rankin, that one.
Okay, so the tree one, I think Zah is the one that made reference to the tree. So maybe, sorry, what the last point is?
What was the last question?
Due to our home environment and work environment becoming one, how do we handle the balance between who you are and what you do?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, you know, to handle the balance is that you need to be able to create boundaries for yourself. And why I say that is, you know, and especially for people that are mothers and you're homeschooling, you're working, you know, there are certain deliverables that are expected of you. You've got friends, you know, so if you don't really create a set of boundaries in terms of, you know, planning properly, you know, if it's work, but the balance is within the work period, you can still attend to the child, you know, do homeschooling, because nobody's managing your time but yourself. So it again goes back to how do you manage or have discipline, self-discipline. So you can still look after your kids and do like an hour of school training or 2 hours, because the school is normally not that long. But then you know that after that, you can still go back to your work, whether it's late in the evening or whenever you can get it. But what we should not fail to see with how this pandemic has actually turned our world upside down is that it actually still created an opportunity for us to be able to manage our lives in a way that suits us. You know, you have to manage your life in the way that it actually suits you, but then at the same time, not compromising on your work, not compromising on who you are, and also not compromising on the family environment. So I'm not sure if, but
Sorry.
I was saying that I'm not sure if that basically gave an answer. But for me, I think it's just creating those boundaries.
Maybe I can add to that, Vic, because you know one of the important things is to live, I guess, to a degree, a stress-free life, is not to be one person, one type of person in the workplace and a different person in the workplace. And at the end of the day, it's really about the degree to which your personal values are aligned to the values of the company. And if you find yourself in a situation where the company demands of you that which conflicts with your values, I think you're going to have a huge problem in terms of staying in that organization. And you'll need to, because you're constantly having to trade off what you believe in and what the company expects you to do. And it's an important issue to consider when choosing companies or choosing. So we don't always choose bosses, but choosing where you work, understanding what the value system of a company is, and to the degree to which it aligns or conflicts with yours. Because that's actually how we choose friends. That's how we end up with friends. That's how we choose partners. And where there's a value disconnect, that's where then there's a separation. So the pandemic, in terms of the changes it has demanded of us, has really elevated that issue of values alignment. And I think to the point that Letseho made about just also your own value system and self-discipline to remain true to yourself and remain true and aligned to your organization, that you don't now take this time and see it as an opportunity to do other things, and that you focus now on results rather than counting clock cards or whether people have clocked into the workplace or not.
That's a massive unlearning for a lot.
So that's a huge, exactly. So it has certainly turned that tree upside down, and we need a new belief system. And I don't think that process has come to an end yet, because with a lot of research that one is coming across in terms of this whole concept of hybrid workplace, we focused a lot on the place of work, but we haven't really delved into the time of work. And the two need to come together, because that's a totally different way of working, which I think a lot of organizations are still going to have to get to grips with, including my own.
A lot of learning and a lot of unlearning. Heidberg calls it erasing obsolete knowledge. Right?
Sorry, can I also maybe add culture? Because I think that's another thing that we need to also throw into this as something that potentially have been turned upside down in a way for organizations, and maybe not necessarily for the people, because as many of us, there's this notion that when you walk through when you enter an organization, you sort of feel it, you feel the culture, and I think it's something that companies are also leaders are battling with, in terms of how do you remain true to your culture in this current environment. How do you ensure that you keep engaging your people, and just ensuring that you stay connected, and understanding their world a little bit more, just not about you as a business, as an organization, but understand how the people that are actually making this organization a living being, because they're the ones that bring the experiences, they're the ones that bring their own skill set, for the organization to remain, competitive. So how do you ensure that you also take into account, the people and how they're feeling? Because I think that it's a two-way thing. It's not just about the organization; it's also about the organization understanding its people.
Well, it's a question I was going to ask you, but I'm going to make it a little bit later. I want to ask a question to Dr. Sibizagela, and then we'll take another question from the audience. And it really talks to, remember earlier on, I talked to two theories about unlearning and learning. The one theory was that it's a conscious decision as opposed to a forgetting decision. But to what you're saying, Mrs. Rankin and Dr. Marutlule, and I know there's a passion in this question I'm going to ask you. The other theory is that two knowledges sit side by side, right? And you don't eradicate this knowledge, you just keep it, and it sits side by side. And I sense that that's a lot of what's going on right now. That's why people are having difficulty moving to they talk about the new normal, but they want to go back to the old normal. But there's this construct of that it will eventually and gradually degrade over time. Now, where I don't see that working, Dr. Marutlule, is this thing of unlearning, and I'm going to use your words, unlearning the language of violence. We have a habit that we've existed in South Africa in terms of how we communicate, and violence is it, destruction is it. What is your views about unlearning this language of violence? Oh, you're on mute.
You really have touched on something that's really, really important for me, because I get quite passionate about it. But if we balance organizational change, as Lesego was outlining, with country change, as Mzila was outlining. We need to have another difficult conversation, and that conversation is about South African citizens and what they believe is due unto them, right? Several things. Firstly, I think the unlearning that has to happen in the world of work is that we all need to understand that we are all leaders. So leadership is not about a position. Leadership is about the role you enact in the way in which you conduct yourself. So that's the first piece. The second piece in the social environment is, unfortunately, we have a leadership in government that has encouraged this thing I call learned helplessness. So we have disabled people from thinking for themselves and solving for themselves. So in becoming a nanny state where you reward behavior that doesn't move us forward, you actually are encouraging them, because the thing that you reward is what grows. That's why organizations have KPIs, and they'll give you 30% for strategy, 20% for this. And invariably, people would work to those elements that are in those KPIs. So in this country, I do think that we have a fundamental problem of reversing a practice that says, whatever I want, government must provide. And if government doesn't provide, I will burn down the school. I will burn down the clinic. I will burn down the library. Here's what happens. A community with no library is a community where young people cannot go to seek and acquire knowledge. A community without a clinic is a community where all the elderly cannot go and get vaccinated in this present climate of COVID. So there needs to be a much larger conversation about the consequence of violence and its impact on our ability to become a country, as per the preamble, that can take its place in the family of nations.
Absolutely, and I think it talks to what Mzila was talking about this element of risk, and the risk that we're facing as all of us in South Africa because of some of the challenges that we're putting into place, and and the thing is, Mrs. Rankin is absolutely right in terms of the cultures and organizations are gonna. Because when you leave there, and when you if it's not to Mzila's point as well, if it's not something that fits with your values, and how do you extend those cultures in a disparate, remote way, there's a whole lot of new thinking that we need to come up with in terms of making all this work. Let me go back to Refiwe. Refiwe, you got a couple of questions?
Yes, we have a question from Sistoli, one of our hosts at Valuate.
Yeah.
And she's asking, am I allowed to have a moment of a pity party instead of being resilient all the way? And
am I allowed to have a moment of what?
A pity party.
Pity
instead of being
party.
resilient all the way.
Yeah.
All the way.
So I'll take that, but I think any of the other speakers are welcome to add. I think one must have a pity party, because you must acknowledge that something has happened and not deny it. Denying it and trying to sweep it under the carpet is not going to make it go away. So in dealing with disappointment, distress, I think it's that aspect I spoke about, of that self-awareness, that acknowledge that, okay, I didn't like what happened, or in fact, more importantly, this is how it's making me feel. And deal with those feelings and have a way of managing yourself out of that feeling rather than digging a deeper hole, because it just feels comfortable and secure to be in that hole. So I have no problem with a pity party, and different people will deal with it differently. Some will make it last long, some will make it last short, but have an effective way of getting out of it with a clear understanding that it was a pity party. It's not where you want to be, and have a clear view of what you're going to, or what you're going to get out into when you come out of that pity party, and have a celebration. Positive celebration.
Absolutely. I'm going to hand straight over to Dr. Marutlule.
Thank you. That's very spot on, Mzila. I think that's really important for the people on the call to remember is this concept called relational intelligence, because how we react to things has very little to do with what's going on. It has everything to do with our emotional investment in what's going on. So a pity party could be, woe is me, and it may not necessarily be about the event. So somebody forgot to invite me to a Friday Zoom team building. Your response to that event is what breeds an outcome. That outcome could be, well, they forgot, or somebody doesn't like me, or this is the third time that Refilo sends an invite and she forgets me. So it never is about the event. It's always about our response and interpretation of the event. It is, yes, it is true that there are moments where things don't go your way, but it's also rich to understand what in you feels the way you feel, to Mzila's point, so that you then can be a lot more accountable for your own feelings versus projecting your sentiments.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, I like the idea that the pity party is not about the actual event. It's about your investment in the event. So that explains a couple of my personal pity parties. So I must just reflect a little bit deeper on that. But one of the things, we've got some young people on this session today. Some our youth, our future leaders, Mzila, myself, Mr. Mtenjani and Dr. Maritlule and myself and Mrs. Rankin, in the next 20 years, we want to be putting our feet up on some beach somewhere there in Neisner, although some others are doing it already, and relaxing. And we've got the youth here. And I'm going to ask Mrs. Rankin a question because I know this is a passion of hers as well. And one of the things that's happened, which we've all had to unlearn really quickly and relearn, is that all of a sudden we've got 5 generations in the workplace, right? We've got traditionalists, close to their 60s, and we got these Gen Zs or something that's coming in and making things happen, right? And I want to know from her leadership, because when I grew up, it was all subservience to the boss. The boss said, and it was done. We never questioned the boss, etc., etc., etc. In your view, in the new leadership style, Mrs. Rankin, what is the kind of experience you're going through in your team, having different generations? And I know you've got some really, really young, bright sparks, of which I think 1 or 2 of them are on already. How do you manage that juggling of traditionalists to millennials and Gen Z?
Thank you. Yeah, I've managed it by creating a safe space where, it's not about, a different team member that's got over 25 years of experience versus a five-year experienced member that actually potentially could come up with ideas that are very innovative, very current. And I've got a young man. I know that I saw that he's actually logged on, and it's just by allowing people, I've allowed my team to have the platform to speak up. They must talk about their ideas. Some of them have the different abbreviations that they use that are actually quite current, that some of us oldies don't even know. So the way I manage my team is that, I've actually just created a safe platform. And also, whilst it's a very competitive environment, it's creating the environment where people, don't feel like they can't tap into other people's wisdom, that experience that people have. So I think what I've seen is, the team is in a position where, they can talk to each other, they check in. And also I created the Zoom drinks that we kind of celebrate deals, no matter how small. So in the platform, you actually see people coming out of the shell, people that are quite probably old and mature, but they can bring themselves up or lower to the level of being able to wear shades and something fun, because it's not all about being serious. Sometimes it's all about being able to be in a space where you're appreciated, where your input is appreciated, and also being able to bring others along with you. So yeah, but it's actually quite a nice team that I've actually led, and I think that's how I've led it, and that's how I've sort of unlearned how to just be stiff and stick to the norm, and just how to be current, and be able to use the youngsters to give us tech ideas, for instance, that we don't know about, or whatever they come up with. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the point is, I think Dr. Marukluda said it, that we're all leaders in our different respects, and if we can acknowledge that and tap into wisdoms, as you put it, of each other, then we all move, as opposed to assuming that the center of knowledge in the universe resides in one person, and that's hierarchical. So absolutely. So I'm conscious of time, so what I'm going to ask is one more question from Refilwe, and then
there's a great question there that's been asked.
Oh, is there a question there? Which question is that?
Yeah, maybe Refilwe on what skills we need to learn and what we need to unlearn
to be future
yes, so we have a question from Mutudi asking what skills should we learn and unlearn to be the future corporate leaders, such as all the ones.
Okay, I want you to hold that question, because that's going to be our summary question, and everybody's going to have a minute on that question, because that's a critical one, and I think a beautiful one to end on. Is there another one that we can just pose?
Yes, there's another one from Josh, and he says, touching on the brilliant point Uncle Vic made, how does a young individual who has knowledge of new technology and thus the positive implication it can have on the organization go about implementing that technology? A lot of time it is difficult to convince someone to adopt an approach that they don't understand. And then there's one more question from me.
Oh, okay. So quickly shoot your question, and then what's your question?
Okay, so my question is that I find that young people are more courageous with their vulnerability in the workplace, and not so much the older generation. So how do you create a safe space for the older generation to be vulnerable and open up? In my experience, I look at a lot of older generation, I'm just like, that's just trauma screaming right now. So you need to deal with that. But how do I create that?
All right, so there are two questions there. Can you all just give a quick tidbit on each of those? I feel a little bit like an anchor on ENCA, and the news is coming in at 8 and I need to finish. I'm really excited about it. Okay, quick tidbit in each of those, and then we'll go to a summary. Shall we start with Dr. Marukluda? No, you're muted.
I think Zila can take. I thought Zila could take the skills one, but that's fine. I'm happy to just talk about trauma versus vulnerability.
Go for it.
There's a difference between vulnerability and authenticity, and I think sometimes the now generation confuse the two. Vulnerability is not you bringing everything to the office so that there's this public psychosis, which is rewarded on Twitter and everywhere else. Because there's a way to behave in the world of work, whether we like it or not. Yes, we're being human, but there's a way we behave, which is the same reason why Tito Mboweni, when he was governor of the Reserve Bank, he only ever used one photograph of himself, because he said, I'm never going to have a picture of me as a governor chewing meat from Chisanyama, because everything about my person communicates the stature of my office. So yes, there is a place for vulnerability, but there also is a way to behave in those places. And unfortunately, that's called adulting.
Yes.
I think on the question of skills, I think the biggest skills that young people are going to have to learn are actually relationship skills, because the technical skills, anyone can pick those up. But one of the things you've got to realize as a leader is that you actually get results through people. And you might have the best technical skills in the world, but if you cannot engage and work with people and don't have that ability to engage with people, your technical skills actually are worth zero. So those are the skills that and I think it's an important point that Zah made, that I think a lot of youth today are growing around this world of technology and social media. And that's the basis upon which relationships are formed. Now, I might be speaking out of turn or I might be out of depth, but there is something to be said about the kind of relationships that are forming on social media versus real relationships between people in person and what that means. And that's going to be a huge skill. And what the other thing that I've also recognized, it's also going to come with the ability to communicate effectively, to be able to, because one of the things you actually do as a leader as you go up the corporate ranks, you're actually selling. You are selling to your peers the things that you want to do in the organization. And it talks to the point that is made about, how does a young individual who has knowledge of a new tech go about implementing it? Sometimes it's not even the best tech that gets implemented, but you got to be able to develop a relationship with a sponsor in the organization who will help you get that idea across, because you as an individual are probably not going to be able to. And a long time ago, I read one of my favorite strategists, I've forgotten his name, despite he being my favorite, who spoke about the guerrilla tactics within corporate that you got to employ to get new things being done. You actually got to go underground. But how you do that is you get a sponsor to take you underground, to sponsor you financially in terms of working on that technology. And then you come up when it can work and be proven. And then he goes or she goes and sells it to the exco and it gets approved by the board. And so it's about the politics of an organization that you need. They're not always negative, but they are there for you to be able to influence and be influenced.
The maneuverability. Mrs. Rankin, I'd like you to take the question from Josh, which is, because I think it's apt for you. How do young people get us oldies to accept some of the ideas that they come up with? Is there something that you can recommend they do, or is it just a facet of influence and persuasion?
Yeah, I think it's influence and persuasion. I mean, Zilla mentioned it just now, because it is the art of selling, or it's finding the guerrilla tactic. Actually, I wanted to add that it's more around initiative. You have to take an initiative and be able to take that idea and present it. And sometimes it might be accepted, sometimes not. So you've got to still be able to ask, if it was not accepted, understand the reasons why was it not accepted, and then go work on those reasons. But it should not stop you from coming back again, with a different or a more refined idea that you have. Because it doesn't mean that because you believe that it's a great idea, that it will automatically just be accepted. And the other thing is, the sponsorship or having a sponsor, especially in big organizations, is very critical, because those are the things that are going to get you above the line. That sponsor, before when you have that idea, you're going to run it past that sponsor. That's going to say, maybe not. You need to tweak it this way, because I know that Paul and so and so and so and so, that might appeal to them, because the sponsor knows the organizations, they know the politics, they've been around, so they can sort of guide you in terms of how you get your idea across the line. But it's never about the fact that people don't want to hear about great ideas. Right now, more than ever, companies actually do want to hear about great ideas.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And look at me, 8 o'clock on the dot. Oh man, ENCA, hire me. Come on. I mean, this is how it's done. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. I know there are lots of questions still coming in. and time's up, and we can have this conversation forever. But to Dr. Marutlule, to Mr. Mtenjani, and to Mrs. Rankin, a million thank yous. You've made the Value Edian team's dream come true. You've made my dream come true. We're just so excited about having done this, and we're certainly going to be doing it more. Thank you for those of you who came on board. Please don't forget day 2. We have another session tomorrow with a different panel and a different conversation. So you're very welcome to come in and learn a little bit more about learning by unlearning. But until then, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm going to put this quickly on gallery view so I can see everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you for the discussion. Insightful, deep, and meaningful. And yeah, I hope you know that we have to unlearn and learn. I was going to say then learn, but and learn, but still unlearn. And the belief system that rides within you is going to drive your behavior. So understand the belief system, because if you don't change that, behavior ain't going to change. Well, not sustainably anyway, with resilience. See? Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great evening. Woohoo!